Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, November 16th. Today we're going to be continuing a series on generations that we began, about a year ago when we had a group of millennials by Zoom, and we talked about some of the issues and concerns that they had, members of their generation were facing, and we followed that up with another conversation right here in the studio with a group of three local folks who represented the baby boomer generation. That was so much fun that we decided we had to keep going with that. Unfortunately, we got a good nudge in that direction by one of our panelists here today, Ari Rudiakov, who is the co-artistic director of the Taconic Music, suggested that Generation X needed to be represented. So we are here today to talk about Generation X. That's the group of folks who were born between 1965 and 1980, and kind of what were some of the major influences, things that happened, outlooks that they feel about their age cohort. So great to have our three folks here today. We like to think that all of our guests are special, but this is certainly a special group. In addition to Ari Rudiakov, we're really pleased to be joined by Paige Vignola, who is an assistant director at the Manchester Community Library, who handles education programs and community engagement, and also Matt Samuelson, who is an attorney in Manchester, who with his wife Jennifer runs the Samuelson Law Firm. So, Matt, Ari, Paige, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, Generation X.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have a very kind of mixed, reputation, if that's the right word. But let's go around the table and sort of just to get started and talk about what your general thoughts are about your generational peers. Ari, since you were the one who kind of made it clear to me that this was. I guess if we were having a discussion about housing, we'd be saying the missing middle, because you're sort of in between two generations, baby boomers and millennials that seem to have gotten, for good or bad reasons, a lot of attention. So why don't you get us started here? What are your general thoughts about your age group?
Well, thank you for asking me first. I'm not sure that was the best idea. Well, just briefly, everybody has their own stories, and when we're little kids, we don't know from generations, we don't know from anything. Right. But in hindsight and retrospect, we can glean certain things. So I actually first heard the term Generation X appear, I think, in a Time magazine article somewhere in the very early 90s or late 80s. And it kind of described in brief what was going on as I was getting out of college and going through grad school, which was all the baby boomers had our jobs. Basically, and we weren't getting them. Something to that effect. I'm going to go out on a slight limb here with my peer groups, and guess that I am at the vanguard of what you would consider that generation. I was born in 1965. The President of the United States was Lyndon Baines Johnson, and the Beatles were still touring.
Okay. The good old days.
Yeah. Growing up through the 70s and into the early 80s, high school through college was a lot of change, a lot of cross influences, and seeing how parents and their kids and the whole family structures were shifting and changing. So a lot of it, had an effect on me personally as things went. I grew up in semi-urban New York City, an area called Riverdale, New York. And there's a lot to tell. I mean, early memories and all the rest, we can kind of drill down on these things a little bit more. But my sense of it is that my friends, my peers that I grew up with, certainly went through some stuff. Parents were divorcing at a higher rate, starting in the very early 70s. That's statistically shown. And it might have been even more so on the East Coast and the left coast, and maybe not so much in the middle. I don't have the granular data on that kind of thing, but I saw how it affected my friends and how peripherally it affected me, what certain world events were doing in a real sense, like, for example, the Vietnam War was getting ramped up when I was born, and it was just getting worse. Watching these newscasts with all male broadcasters, Walter Cronkite, Roger Mudd, and the 6 o'clock news, all of these things, looking back on it now, I would have thought, well, gosh, wouldn't things have gotten better somehow? Real world experience, just one example, then I'm going to stop talking, was the oil embargo of 1974. And it was Parents' Day at my school. And I waited. My mom was working, so my dad had volunteered to come, and he said, I'll be there for your first class. And it was one of those days, and this is so hard to fathom now, that there was actually a shortage of gasoline. You had to wait online to get gas, and your car license plates were divided between odd and even numbers, so you couldn't get gas sometimes as long as 3 days in a row. My dad was 4 hours late to Parents' Day. With my not having a cell phone, not knowing where he was, or he couldn't get in touch with me because he couldn't get out of the car to get to a payphone, all of that stuff I just left wondering and kind of going through my day. So that was the oil embargo's effect on me as a child, for example. So stuff like that as you cycle through and getting into the 80s and all that fun stuff, a lot of it was really, really fun growing up, I have to say. We had winters in New York City and all the rest. So we can get into all that later. But I thought I brought it up and I presented this idea to you because I think in a kind of cartographic way, if you're like a map maker or something, to sort of get a higher altitude aperture of this kind of information, these scenes, who overlaps with what do these generations have in common, what don't they, what hung over from the greatest generation to the baby boomers, what didn't, and how we ultimately are all influenced by each other, generationally. Right. It's inevitable.
Yep.
So it's just kind of fun. In Generation X, that's 65 million. We don't really want to be here, so see ya.
Well, the other thing
We're complicated.
I often think about this, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, during the boomer conversation, is that no generation is monolithic. Because, I think a lot of people think of boomers as a bunch of kids who were running around protesting the Vietnam War all the time, but the reality was that was really a minority of that age group. And so just to kind of, have one image of every generation colored by one thing is highly inaccurate, I think. But anyway, well, Paige, on to you.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump on a couple of things that Ari said, but I didn't want to jump in while you were saying it. So you're talking about escalating divorce rates for our generation, and 100% correct, but I also think it's interesting to point out that, that's because no-fault divorce was actually finally allowed, and women didn't have to prove that they were being beaten to death in order to be able to leave their husbands.
Yeah, true.
So maybe there was a higher divorce rate, but at the same time, I'm assuming that there were many people whose lives were actually preserved by that. So I can't necessarily think that escalating divorce rates always has to be a negative thing, because again, that's just the first thing that came to my mind. In addition, in our generation, we'll just go with women's rights in general. I can't even say how many times my mother told me that when I was born, which was 1975, she wasn't allowed to have a credit card in her own name. She had to have her husband's permission in order to be able to do that. So, again, these sorts of things I think are definitely advances through our generation for sure. One of the other things that struck me that you said that when your father was late because trying to get gas and whatnot, you had no idea where he was. I revel in that from my childhood, right? I mean, I look at my kids, right? My 17-year-old who has a phone and I can track her wherever she is and she's constantly, texting or emailing or whatnot. So, my mother never knew where I was at any given time. And if I wanted her to know, it's like, okay, well, here's the telephone, here's the payphone on the corner that I maybe hanging out nearby there. If you call it, maybe you'll find me, right? I mean, but I can't even imagine if people were able to track me when I was at that age. Now, mind you, I was, I'm going to go, my heyday was the 90s, because I started high school in 89 and I graduated college in 97, I guess. So, I mean, I'm a grunge kid, so to speak.
Cool.
But
Gotta love that.
But yeah, I didn't want anybody to know where I was for sure.
Right. Now, I was born in '68, and so not that far after Ari, but the whole surveillance thing, and we have real-time surveillance of our kids just like you, and it's just odd. And so our youngest, who's a freshman in college now, often says to me, she's like, your childhood sounds so cool, because you could kind of go do what you wanted. And we were total latchkey kids.
One of my favorite descriptions of Generation X is the last generation of feral children. And I think that is so
It's
fantastic,
true.
you
It's
know?
true.
I mean,
Yeah.
feral children, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah, I
go.
think my parents were more feral than I was, but you know.
But the last
So,
generation of
like,
feral.
Yeah, it got kind of narrowed down.
Where did you
But,
each grow up respectively, if I may?
Williamstown, Massachusetts, so a lot like Manchester.
So I was partially Boston and partially Miami, so it's a weird mix.
It is. Yeah. I'm on this little listserv for a cartoonist, like for the New Yorker, and she sends stuff every day. And so 2 days ago, literally, she was talking about Gen X and different generations, and so the cartoon that she had sent was of a maternity ward, and they're like all these babies in little baskets, and one baby is leaning to the other and says, "So, what do you think our generation is called?" And she was like, part of it, as to your point, part of it is that nothing is really monolithic like that, because you can't. I mean, life is too complex. But there are definitely, themes and issues. And I was remembering that my first job in a law firm was actually down in the Virgin Islands, and I was doing some really cool environmental law. And my boss, who was a boomer, came in. He was brilliant. He was from New York. He went to Columbia. He was a very smart guy, but definitely a boomer. And he came in, and it was the first week I was there. He kind of laid a New York Times article down on my desk, and he's like, "So read that." And it was about Gen X and about the differences between the generations, and how basically, as I remember it, the boomer generation, everybody was looking for like that great job. And as the opinion piece was saying, the Gen X generation just wanted a great life. And he's like, "I don't get that." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" It's not a bad idea to have the goal being a great life as opposed to, just making a ton of money.
A perfect job.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I often, well, I'm not going to drift into my own thoughts about some of this, but I want to explore this whole idea of the last generation have kind of like a free, feral childhood, because I often think back. My own childhood was like that. My parents didn't know where I was. In fact, they didn't care. We just went on our bikes. We rode around the neighborhood. We did whatever we wanted as long as we were home by dinner and they weren't getting a call from the police department. We were fine. And nowadays it just seems so different. I mean, maybe I'm just not getting it or whatever I'm not seeing, but it just seems like nowadays kids have much more structured childhoods. You know that they're in school from 8 to 3, and then to 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock we're doing this, and so forth and so on. And I don't know whether or not that's good or bad. I mean, maybe it's just a reflection of the times, and that's all there is. But I do think the idea of having kind of freedom and independence to kind of just do what you want to do, make up rules of games, that was a good thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Well, we were all parents, correct?
Yes.
So we have, recently I've had just stunning, startling moments of deja vu, in the family home that I grew up with in Yonkers, New York. I partly grew up there, where my son's home for the weekend from college, and there he is sitting at my desk that I used to do the work, and I'm the dad who's kind of wandering in, trying to sidle over and say, "Hey, how's it going? What's you doing?" And trying to hang out, and being
That's
not rejected, but it's like, "Yeah, hey Dad, what's up?" that kind of thing, and it's what comes around full circle is very, very interesting. The technological part and the freedom part. Yeah, we were pretty feral. I mean, we had a certain appointed time where we were told to be back home. We had tasks that we knew that we had to take care of, homework and such, and all the rest. And the rest of it was an open program. So yeah, we courted danger and mischief. Property destruction was at a minimum, for the record. And we just didn't have to worry about that so much. If you're 5 minutes late, or if you don't respond to a text within 30 seconds,
Yeah, the interesting thing to me, though, is I sort of resist that idea of surveillance. I mean, just because it seems weird. I mean, you shouldn't have to be able to like see where everybody is all the time. But our kids' generation, I think, has embraced that for the most part. I mean, they there's the Life 360 sort of thing that all the parents have, but the kids have this like Snap map. Snapchat has a map, so you can like see where all your friends are all the time.
That's so creepy to me.
It's weird, yeah. But it's something that's like a normal part of their life.
But also, I mean, that the whole Snapchat thing, and I know, it's like with kids these days, but like the whole Snapchat thing, it's like, why do you need to send a picture every whatever, just because you got to keep the streak alive?
Exactly.
Like, it's almost video gaming communication, and I mean, it's so peculiar to me.
Strange.
I'm not going to lie, I think the Snapchat filters are pretty funny, but other than that, I mean, like the whole premise of it is just
how they get you.
peculiar.
That's the gateway drug.
I get you.
Well, one of the things I think must be interesting about your generation is you were the sort of last generation to kind of grow up in an analog world where, if you wanted to make a phone call, you picked up a telephone and dialed a number, and, television was kind of the cutting edge.
The youngest person in the house is the remote control.
Nobody
And there wasn't.
had a
No, the
laptop.
youngest person is the remote
or
control.
God forbid, an iPhone. And it's just interesting that as adults, you were the first generation to really kind of be, immersed in that technology, or at least it became a big part of the world. That must have been quite a transition, I would think.
I don't know, I felt it was, I don't really think I even considered the transition part of it. It just was. Oh, cool, email, that's interesting, I really like that. Oh, whoa, there's bulletin boards where you can talk to people online who are in the other part of the world. That's pretty cool, but just sort of roll with the punches that such a thing existed. One of the things that I find interesting about, again, Generation X, although I prefer to call us X-Wingers, but that's because
That's cool.
I'm a geek.
Like Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely like Star Wars, because...
And how many times did you see it when it came out? Oh, wait.
Now, was I in the theater for the original film? Absolutely not, but I'd be willing to bet I've seen it as many times as you have. So, and I am talking about canon, not the crap that came out afterwards. So, sorry, I don't know if I can say that on TV. I apologize.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought. Derailed. I don't know where I was
Sorry.
going with that one.
X-Wingers,
X-Wingers,
and
okay.
Star Wars, and
but just the fact
Something
that
about
you
the
were
generation.
like experiencing it real time.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's just sort of, that's what they say. You put the frog in room temperature
I was just
water,
gonna say
and then
that.
you turn up the heat, and it doesn't
just
know it's
gonna say
being
that.
boiled. So, from my perspective, just advances in technology are the same as any other thing on a given day. And it's yep, that's what we're doing now. Okay, that's cool. That's something new for me to learn, right? I kind of find new technology sort of intriguing. So.
It is, and I think that frog in the water thing is a good analogy, because you don't really notice it as it's happening. It's only really in retrospect that you can kind of start putting it together. But I read the book 1984 as a high school assigned reading in 1984, and it freaked me out a bit. And you read like Brave New World and all that stuff too, and I kind of prefer the Brave New World model, but. In 1984, AT&T was recalling all of the rotary phones that we had in our houses and said, here's a free phone. And I was like, well, why are they doing that? They're probably having some sort of like tap on that phone, and everybody's just like willingly putting it in. And I was like, that's weird. But now, it's basically what you have with cell phones too. And you just sort of live through it, and it becomes a reality, which is odd. But you sort of give up these freedoms willingly, because there's this cool technology, like a push-button phone as opposed to a rotary phone.
You give up freedoms, and you give up privacy. right? I mean, and I don't even mean in terms of whether or not somebody can track you. I just think about in terms of the fact that I'm going to pull out a phone and take a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I used to get little disposable camera phones when you could, or, you know, like a regular, sorry, not a phone, but a little disposable camera, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Camera phone kind of just goes hand in hand now, right? Or, you know, if you could afford a real camera, then you had a real camera, right? But then you had to go take your picture judiciously because you only have so many on the roll, and then you got to go get it developed, and then you guys like, oh wow, okay, well that one's got my thumb over it, and 15 different of the 24, right?
It's a very different.
Or you got a Polaroid camera, which is almost always bad.
Oh, of course it's going to be bad. And then you sit there for, you know, 20 minutes like that, right? But now there are so many pictures of absolutely everything, and I think, look, and go back to the idea of being parents, right? I don't have real photo albums, right? I mean, like I've got photo albums from photo albums from when I was in high school, photo albums of my friends when we were in college, but there are no real photo albums in my house anymore because all pictures are taken on a phone, and it's like, well, what am I going to do? Go print it on cardstock? You know, so I mean, the number of pictures that actually tangibly exist, at least in my world, are dramatically reduced, but there are 50 billion different pictures that somebody can have on their phone or post online. Holy mackerel, that's a whole other thing, right? And I don't know, did you sneak a picture of me on my way in the building? And how do I know you're not going to post it somewhere? And I don't even know if the picture that was taken of me, like I may not even know it exists.
Right.
I'm not that I'm accusing you, but you know, I mean, it just,
Sure.
it's an odd concept to me that there's just all of these images and sound recordings unintentionally that can just be out there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's accepted. You know.
Totally accepted, yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Versus the give me the negatives and I'll take the picture and now nobody ever has proof that this happened,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So one way or the other, you know, if someone gets a hold of your cell phone, you die or something happens, criminal investigation, they can go through your entire history because it's out there.
Yeah.
Once it's out there, it's out there. Text message never dies, I'm told, or so I have read. The technology changes were fascinating. It wasn't that quick throughout the decade of the 70s, as I recall. Earliest memory, one of them standing as a 4-year-old watching Neil Armstrong land on the moon in 1969. But my parents' portable black and white Zenith TV, and all you could just see was this little dot. Because the resolution was horrible.
Right. But
They didn't have a color TV
Yeah.
for another 20 years. We were perfectly happy with that. Not too much was changing throughout the 70s. And then there was the Betamax VHS fight that kind of came and went. And then 80s come around, and then the acceleration began a little bit.
Yeah, that's true.
Compact discs. When I was in college, I bought my first compact disc. I was like, ooh, shiny. And I quickly went about saying, I'm replacing all my LPs immediately. You know, and now and then the communication technology was in fits and starts too, because you had cell phones, but it wasn't married to the internet in any way. Resisted for years getting a computer because they were inverse proportions, size and cost, versus what's now. Miniaturization took hold, and we know that one of our cell phones can power the entire history of the Apollo Moon project. But they were big, bulky. I finally got one in the late 90s after much prodding. It's like, what's wrong with the phone? What's wrong with bulk mailing and all these things that as concert artists we were doing with not-for-profits and all of that. Finally got it there, but I realized I couldn't send an email and accept a phone call at the same time. So they hadn't figured that out. So there was this bridge technology called a hot call thing, this little device where a red light shows up if a call's coming in, and you have like 10 seconds to decide if you want to kick out of your, log out of your email or take the call. It was really stressful.
Or if you're in a house with somebody else and you happen to be logged in in order to be able to do some work and somebody picks up the phone somewhere in the house.
Exactly. It was silly, but also just my point is that the development was a little bit fraught and kind of herky-jerky that way. But we just rolled with whatever we were presented, and so we got various phases of cell phones, the clamshell, Star Trek communicator type, the StarTAC, or the fixed ones, or whatever it was, and then we got our first iPhones and iPads and stuff like that. We all used them. But a lot of the technology earlier than that was very expensive. My parents couldn't afford a VHS machine, and didn't get a color TV for a long time. And when they did get, I was just fascinated by how purple everybody looked. I was like, what? And then you try to adjust it, and it just turned green. So it was.
Well, let me just pivot to another subject that I think would be interesting to talk about in the wake of the technology side of things, and that's the music of your era. Grunge rock, rap, many more genres I'm sure that I know little about. But I guess what do you all think about the music that was popular of your time and all the various genres that were out there? It was a break, I think, from the music that was popular in the 70s and 80s, and you know what came on then. Any particular thoughts on
Yeah.
what made it great or kind of questionable or whatever?
I actually, from the non-musician, I do have a lot of thoughts on that one because it's funny. I said I was in high school and college in the 90s, right? So, I mean, we're talking hardcore grunge, a lot of industrial. You may get a little bit of punk going on, but I mean, like that was sort of the music that I was drawn to. But at the same time, when I was in high school, the bands that were really popular, I mean, you're talking Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, right? I mean, because there's always that, and I live by the assertion that if you don't have Zeppelin on your playlist, you don't have a playlist, right? I mean, like, so like even music that would not have been of the age.
Right on.
You know, I mean, like the 70s music was huge in the 90s. There was I think a lot of mockery for a lot of what was produced in the 80s, but you know.
But even that was kind of cool, though. I mean, like Flock of Seagulls, you know, you can't.
I don't know if I would go cool with that.
But it's iconic.
Yes,
I mean,
iconic for sure.
right?
Yeah.
With the hair and all that new wave stuff.
Oh, the
Oh,
hair.
Yeah.
80s hair. That's enough said.
Insane.
Well, hair and shoulder pads, right? Because you got to balance it out somehow. Yeah.
Yeah,
MC Hammer.
Oh yes, which are back though.
Ow.
I don't know. Like
Yes.
and mullets are back too, and that's the thing that
Yeah,
shocks me
mullets
a
are
lot.
back.
Like I had students in my classroom. I'm like, what are you doing with that? Wow, you know, it's business in front and party in the back, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me! Shave that thing off. That's
Your party's out of
horrible.
my business then.
It's awful. Why are mullets a thing again? No.
I do not know, but they're coming back. Yeah. But that 80s music, the iconic nature of it is kind of fun to revisit, and I think it is coming back. And the whole 80s thing is coming back with like Stranger Things.
Absolutely.
You know?
That's why everybody loves D&D again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I used to play D&D. I love D&D.
Yeah.
It's like very dorky but fun. But
We got a room full of geeks here.
Clearly.
Well, I mean, I am the child of two musicians.
Yeah.
So professional musicians and professional music teachers. And my father was a self-described square. He was firmly in the classical world. My father was a concert cellist. And my mother was a pianist and then went into teaching kindergarten through third grade music for a quarter century. So my early upbringing was pretty strictly classical music.
Yeah.
My father, the ritual of his practicing the cello starting at roughly 7:30 in the morning, every single morning, without fail, for like 2 hours or more.
That's
And
great.
it woke me up because I was right next door. He didn't care. He didn't care.
That's
What
good
I
for you.
admire about, I know that we are all obviously capable of disciplined work and behavior and outcomes, but I admired very much the discipline of my parents. So I know that even if I don't always measure up, I know exactly what it takes to get for the excellence quotient. Musically, then, very quickly, I suddenly found myself with 2 feet. Look, one in classical, one in rock. As soon as somebody played a Beatles LP for me, I went over to a friend's house. I'd never heard a record before, and I heard "Drive My Car." And I was like, oh, wow, you know, backbeat. There's something going on, you know. And that quickly evolved. And then I was sucked into the whole '70s Phantasmagorica thing. I loved for a time Kiss.
Oh yeah.
no way.
Whatever you say about their music, silly, and a lot of it
Sounded great on the radio.
It's not great, honestly, but you go to one of their shows, and they made it their business to give you every penny's worth,
Yeah, yeah.
you know. So I loved that, and then I went on to progressive rock. I loved bands like Rush and King Crimson,
Yeah.
and then now I will say I'm absolutely omnivorous with music. Back then, as the '70s changed to the '80s and Flock of Seagulls came on the scene, we rockers were like,
What is that?
what is that crap? And then we already hated disco,
Yeah.
you know, and so that was all short-lived, and everybody now plays so beautifully in the sandbox together, courtesy of Spotify, no attention span, shuffle play, and just wanting to live in the moment musically with what feels good for that moment.
I do love, however you said, and everybody hates disco, and everyone in the room goes, yeah.
And now I'm watching Mamma Mia, the movies, with my wife and kids, and I really enjoy ABBA, and I really have a soft spot for the Bee Gees and all of it. This is well-crafted, fun music.
Yeah.
And we went to see Duran Duran in concert a month and a half ago. It was great
That's
fun.
gotta be,
That's-
that'd be a
And
lot of
incidentally,
fun, yeah.
they still sound great. So
Amazing.
anyway, there was a lot going on, but now I love all of it. When punk rock started coming out, the Ramones, I thought it was the most simple-minded, stripped-down stuff. But what was the benefit of it was that any cover band could do it.
Yeah.
Anybody could pick up anything and play 3 chords and yell like Joey Ramone. And I did exactly that.
Yeah.
And I love.
Yeah, but
that
listen
kind of thing was
to the
great.
Ramones and the Clash and Sex Pistols even now, and you're like, yeah, that sounds kind of like really soft.
Yeah,
'Cause
well,
it's-
by
it
comparison.
doesn't quite have the
Of
edge
course.
that the grunge sort of, really brought out. And I like that. I like the punk aspect of grunge a lot, and it seemed to be this like voice of a generation finally, to have
Yeah.
just like angry, like lots of traction.
A lot of
No, it's-
angst.
it's
Yeah.
really-
There's definitely a lot of angst.
Nirvana
Yeah.
comes out and blows everybody away.
Yeah, right?
Oh,
Then you have
crazy.
songs, 9 Inch Nails coming out and just,
Yes.
just creeping you out and making you mad.
No, 9 Inch Nails. I mean, like, that's my teen years right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Kidding
yeah,
me?
Jane's
Addiction.
Pretty Hate Machine in '89, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jane's Addiction.
Jane's
Yep.
Addiction was
Mhm.
crazy. Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff finally gets
Alice
away
in
with
Chains.
the soundtrack of
Yeah.
the Matrix movies and stuff like that. And so, a lot of really, really interesting stuff that now, for me, it's a complete mashup. My kids are teaching me more about current stuff because I wouldn't know where to start to look because
Yeah.
the possibilities are so voluminous. It's incredible, the sheer quantity.
And there's a lot
that's
of
available.
good new music going
There's a lot
on.
of really good
There
good
is.
I mean,
There is.
like, the girls have gotten me into like Doja Cat and Megan Thee Stallion, which, whatever you can say about it. Actually, there's some good stuff there.
My oldest has got me hooked into Gang of Youths, and I will defend
Yeah,
that
that's
one.
good.
Oh, they are worth knowing.
Oh, really?
Absolutely worth knowing. Fantastic lyricist.
Gang of Youths, all right.
Gang of Youths, yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Fantastic
Taylor
lyricist.
Swift? That's the only one I know.
T Swift, man. Yes, I mean, they like her as well. Yeah, for sure.
She's very rich.
She has a large following.
The Eras tour was like 20% of the gross national product of Sweden or something like that. I read
Right.
somewhere.
I love how she can like move the needle on global economy. I mean, that's insane.
Not to
Yeah,
mention
it
football.
really is crazy.
But and then you have, bring it back into to today's world, you have memes, right? And one of my all-time favorite memes is, Taylor Swift saying nasty things about her boyfriend, and then there's a picture of Stevie Nicks underneath, is like, hold my beer, right? I mean, yeah.
I think that to tie together a few things together, a lot of things since the 60s and 70s, and a lot of really positive things have been cause for strong reevaluation in society.
Yeah.
And we lived through that change, in some cases tried to affect that change to the extent we can. And one of the things I'm proud of is that the first thing that my son did when he turned 18, he said, I'm going to go vote.
Right.
I'm going to be part of this process and do what I can, speak my mind, speak my truth.
Mhm.
And
That's what you
Cheers.
need. That's
Yeah,
what you need.
absolutely.
Right.
it's like I haven't done something, we haven't been a screw-up generation.
No,
Right.
you did it
Entirely.
right. You did it
It's something
right,
right.
for sure. Mhm.
You know,
If that message got across, then you did your job. Absolutely.
well, we keep trying to find that balance, in the terrifying world, let's be honest, that we have here in the United States, which I
Yeah.
never saw coming, and the world at large.
Yeah.
But also trying to recognize a wonderful line from a wonderful movie that my daughter's addicted to, Lord of the Rings. There is some good left in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Before we leave the cultural side of this and kind of maybe talk a little bit more about some of the political and economic factors that were in play, Paige, you mentioned to me the other day that science fiction was a big part of your growing up, and
X-Wingers, yeah.
and talk about the literature of your times for a second. Is it your sense that science fiction is no longer occupying the same space in today's world that it was back when you were, a teen?
No, I think actually the trend has moved far more to the side of dystopian. But I mean, again, if you think about just sort of happenings in the time periods, it makes perfect sense. Science fiction is designed in order to be able to be a commentary on social situations, and the majority of science fiction, and I'm obviously going to be way overstepping by saying the majority, but let's just say a large portion of science fiction in the 70s, 80s, right? I mean, it's all dealing with governmental structures and fighting against authoritarianism, and again, we're talking about the moon landing, right? I mean, so the foundational memory for the majority of a Generation X, right? So of course, all the advances in technology and all of that is going to be, heavy breeding ground for all kinds of different science fiction ventures. But again, I was having a conversation with my 17-year-old. We were discussing, that's a Gen Z, right? What is the genre that really resonates most with that group? And if you look at it, you've got, Hunger Games, and, what's the one that starts with a D? Sorry, Morgan, I can't remember. But anyway, there's a whole series of no, I was looking at the camera. Yeah, there's a whole series of these dystopian novels that are just like driving, the reading choices, I think, of a large number of late millennials and Gen Zers.
And why?
Well,
why is that?
Because if you look at the world around you and it seems to be crumbling, then you're going to have to write your way out of it, right?
Imagine a better world if you can. Yeah.
Or imagine surviving in the horrific thing that has been handed to you.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of science fiction. I read a lot of Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, and the early television attempts at science fiction there were many more in decades before, but Star Trek, the original series, the whole premise is built on a completely egalitarian society where we are free of all of these difficulties and problems, socioeconomic, racial, gender, all of it. We're just existing and exploring, and everything's cool.
Yep.
And I've always loved that idea from the get-go. And then, sci-fi horror is another subgenre, which I have like a lot. Yeah. Alien and stuff like that.
No, but the cool thing with Star Trek
Don't mess with extraterrestrials. We're going to bite off more than we can chew if we keep at it.
The cool thing about the Star Trek series, though, was, the original one with William Shatner, was that they would be just floating around in space and everything was groovy, but then they'd go, transport themselves down to various different planets, and it would be like visiting different times or societies, and there's this very sort of Nazi episode where they had this authoritarian ruler that they almost got sort of captured by, and the fact that you could just kind of dip into these different cultures was fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Timestamps and just conflict resolution in very creative ways. In that series.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears again, and just to kind of build on something you were put up there a moment ago, Ari. We seem to be going into a world of increasing uncertainty. There are these global crises that are happening that kind of 5 or 6 years ago nobody would have really thought were going to be going on. We have climate change, the sort of existential, concern hanging over everything. I guess, what do you guys make of all that, and how we got to here? As I think back over, some of the big events that your generation went through, starting with the oil crisis of 1973-74, which I remember very clearly, getting in line to buy gas at 3 o'clock in the morning at the local gas station. And then you go on through, the recession of 1987, when the economy kind of seemed to fall apart again for a little while, and a real kind of up and down kind of economic picture during the 90s. 9/11, obviously, a big change that shifted things incredibly for all of us. And then, the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, which again was a gigantic game changer. I mean, what do you make of all that? I'm trying to craft a question here that kind of, drills to that, but I guess your generation has seen a lot of ups and downs, some good periods, and now we're going through another period which the outcome of which is going to be, shall we say, at least at best uncertain.
Yeah. I think that the climate change itself is kind of its own separate threat, and it's this constant like thrumming, and has been really since the 80s. I remember being in high school and reading about it, and the idea that the planet would stop to sort of support our life because of what we're doing was terrifying. But it's been around for like 40 years. And so I think about, there's this other cartoon, because I like cartoons, and it's a bunch of dinosaurs, and they're watching this comet scream down toward the Earth, and this T-Rex is like, oh no, the economy. And I was like, the economy is very important, but it's not as important as actually having an Earth to live on. And I think that, where you start to see the stark difference between generations, excuse me, but I think boomers have characteristically not a whole lot of concern for that, and it was all like corporate driven and profit driven, and that's sort of what has gotten us into this mess. And I think our kids, the Gen Z, probably look at all of the prior generations and they're like, what the hell? Why didn't you fix this? What are you giving us? And so, yeah, the ups and downs of the economy are challenging, and they sort of make our generation in a way, but it's that undercurrent of existential threat, that I think colors all of our lives.
Well, and I think that undercurrent of existential threat, I mean, I don't mean to speak for the coming generations, but, I have conversations with high schoolers all the time who are like, oh yeah, no, I'm never having children. Why would I want to bring kids into this world? Right. And I think it's kind of interesting because, you were talking about how Gen X is the smaller generation between the boomers and the millennials, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems that coming generations are like, forget that, not doing that.
Maybe so. It might be smaller still.
Right, so, and I think that at least through the 80s, this concept of, in order for an economy to be successful, it has to be ever expanding, without recognizing that you can't expand forever.
Right.
But I mean, I think that it also ties into that idea, like the boomers being the largest generation and expanding out, and so therefore the economy is going to be expanding out because there's more people getting involved, and as things, population shifts, then it has to be understood that there's got to be a balance, right?
Yeah.
You can't expand forever.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's a good, theme or aspirational goal to continually improve, but it's impossible to actually succeed at that.
Well, I think there's a difference between improvement and expansion, though, and I think that's what the important focus is, right? I mean, you can absolutely continually improve. That does not mean things have to get bigger.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we kind of, I think, look at a lot of this now, after 20 years of child raising, and, finding ourselves through this time dilation where we don't know where the last 15 to 20 years went because we were really busy raising kids. And we were focused on their welfare, their well-being, and I'm not saying that this pushes other issues to the side, but you're really kind of locked into all of that in a different sort of way than when we were growing up and then when we were single. I speak for myself, of course, but, so we have to, I'm looking at it now through the lens of our children, my wife and my children. I think, really everything that we can do to not give them hope in some Pollyanna saccharine kind of fake way, but just to show them that people can be kind to each other, and that you can do things that don't necessarily destroy the planet, or at least the possibilities exist, because we have all the technology, we have all the resources on this earth to feed everybody, to house everybody, and to not kill each other. It's here. How do we get to this spot? Well, one generation or another is not specifically to blame. There are instigators, drivers, catalysts, causes, and you might even say we're accomplices,
Yeah.
if you wish.
Dude.
You know, the 70s turned into the 80s. Ronald Reagan is the new president. The first thing he does is he reinstates selective service. I'm a 17-year-old kid. I don't want to sign up for the draft. Are you kidding? 7 years earlier, you pulled your last sorry troops out of a blood hell, and you want me to sign up now? Again? So quickly? So that was the first. Then he went after the unions, then he went after the education, and a whole system was built around that, kind of deconstructing democracy slowly and intelligently. They knew what they were doing, that sort of thing. So here, this is maybe the logical fulcrum outcome of all of that 40 years worth of really hard work on the part of some forces. So you have, crazy people running around who are in public office or were or might be again, and what are kids to make of it now? So we're just trying to stand firm. This is the truth. This is possible. This can be okay. Let's lock hands together and try to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, good one.
So one of the things that I, piggybacking on that I try to instill in my children is that complacency is one of the biggest evils that you can possibly carry out, right? I mean, in that, I'm just going to watch this happen, and you said you like Rush, right? So if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, right? So I mean, like if you're going to just do nothing, well, you've made a choice. Your choice is that you're doing nothing, and complacency allows terrible things to happen. And so I try in raising my children, get them to recognize that you can do something. You may be a small speck in the grand scheme of things, but if you don't use your voice, nobody's going to hear it for sure. If you use your voice and the person next to you uses their voice and whatnot, so don't be complacent. Don't just sit back and take it all, and see what you can do.
I think it's important to give them hardworking examples of when you turn the dial of that microscope to focus the aperture on how things can make a difference, small things.
Right.
For example, in local elections, years ago, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, a very favorite representative ran for office and lost by 4 votes. 4. A family of 4 and a friend could have made the difference, for example. So your vote does count because all politics, all life is local, So that's what we try to get them to understand. And I think that they, for the most part, 15 and 19, they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, we definitely have the resources to improve our life and kind of save our constitutional democracy. But
Is it exhausting, all of this? Yeah.
yeah, exhausting is anxiety-ridden and all of that. But you can't let the anxiety just kind of paralyze you.
No.
One of the things I think about as I look around the world today is it's striking to me how many people anyway seem to have lost trust in certain public institutions like the government, the news media. I don't know. I watched in shock and amazement during the COVID period when all these people who maintain that they don't want to get vaccinated against it. When I think back to my own childhood and polio and measles were kind of quite prevalent, and you couldn't wait to get vaccinated.
Right.
I mean, there's just no question about it.
People weren't running around saying polio is a hoax.
Right. And yet we saw public health being basically, attacked at every turn. I just wonder why it is that there's so much trust that has been lost in public institutions like that. You could say the same about churches or labor unions even. They seem to be making a bit of a comeback lately, but it just seems like that's a real difference between the past and the present.
I don't think you can attribute anything to one cause, but I do think 2 things that heavily play into that is the devaluation of education in the country. right? I mean, where you were talking before about, you're going to gut the educational system in order to be able to make sure that you cannot have an educated populace. And, again, people tend to not value having knowledge and experience. I don't even mean a degree, right? I mean, because education does not have to happen only in a school, right? But knowledge is not as valued as opinion. And then you have simultaneously the expansion and proliferation of less educated voices through various social media, web, all the rest of that, right? And so therefore you have just this mad flux of opinion that is now being made public. And there's nothing, I'm not trying to say that people's opinions are not worth it, but I think that recognizing an educated standpoint versus just an opinion, it's vital. And I think that a large number of people have never really had exposure to, media literacy, right? I mean, how do you determine what is actually a reliable source of information? And I think that is a skill that a lot of people are currently missing.
Yeah.
If you hear something often enough, it becomes true. If you say something often enough, it becomes true. Obviously, it doesn't actually become true, but if people believe it's true, then is there really any difference?
Yeah. Now, I remember in the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump was like on screen saying, "We love the uneducated." Like that was sort of his idea because they could be, manipulated more. But
2 + 2 is 5. If you look at it, stare at it long enough.
Exactly. So, there's also been like a fair amount of abuse of power, like the conspiracy theories around that. I think, again, you stare at it long enough and they seem to be real, and so that's when people kind of get siloed off into these little camps that then they start doing dumb stuff. So yeah, media literacy I think is huge, but I don't think that's really taught these days. I mean, I try to read kind of a different range of things each day in terms of the news, just to kind of like piece it together in a Venn diagram in my head, but it doesn't happen too much.
Well, it's also almost impossible to find news that is just news and not punditry,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Sure.
so because any infotainment, which is pretty much what the news is these days, no offense, Andrew, but I mean, like, it is largely infotainment. And so, you have people who are out there trying to get ratings,
Yeah.
and they will say what they need to say in order to be able to get ratings, because that's how you get money, because that's how you get sponsorship. And so the statements don't necessarily have to be true so much as they have to draw people's attention.
Right.
And
that's a resurgence from about 100 years ago when there's kind of a bad term, but I think they called it yellow journalism, where it was all sensational, like Hearst, built an empire on creating these sensational newspapers, and people would just eat it up. And I don't know what happened that got rid of that for a time, but it became better journalism, and now we're kind of flipping back into this sensational kind of confusion.
there was a very specific, I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for. Andrew, you probably would know this better than I am, but there was a very specific, what if it's a law, but that had kind of fallen out. I want to say it's in the mid-90s, somewhere around there, about the necessity of balance in media. I don't want to say anything because I haven't read up on it recently. I remember reading up on it a while back, but. But anyway, there is actually, in a timeline, a reason why there is a larger proliferation of opinion rather than fact in current media, and I can't remember what it was called.
And I'm not recalling that either, but it's interesting because the media landscape, I think, is also kind of shifting a bit away from the idea that a news story or a television program should be this sort of balanced presentation of, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and you the viewers or you the readers decide what you think, to more of a sense that, well, there's a right and a wrong in all of this, and if some politician, let's say, is spewing off nonsense, then you need to point that out. And it can't be just sort of presented as an equal counterpart to the other side of the story.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how that evolution goes
Yeah, my
on.
part, just give me facts. I don't want to hear what your opinion is. I don't, no offense, but like what the newscaster is telling me that how I should interpret the fact is not why I want to read news. I want to know what happened, where it happened, when it happened. I mean, like, you got the 5 W's, right? Like, give me that. Don't tell me your viewpoint on
Totally
it.
want a Sergeant Joe Friday approach to that. The facts and just the facts, ma'am.
Just the fact.
Just the facts, man.
And I think, I have to say, I think that right-leaning, left-leaning, crazy, all of it, journalists and television programs, almost all of it, excluding no one, has some little bias going on,
Sure.
Yeah.
kind of built
It's
into it.
human nature.
Because the ability of the social media and the ubiquity of information, whatever you want to make of it or call it, it's all in this spanner now, where you can kind of put it in this centrifuge and you can extract what you want and shape it the way you like, and that's very difficult, to separate the fact from the fiction, I think.
But as a historian, right, just speaking as a historian, like that's always been the case, right? I mean,
Yeah.
histories are written from the perspective of whoever, so,
Number one.
you're right. The history of the Crusades, written from William of Tyre, is going to be very different from, somebody who is in Saladin's court, right? So, history has always been biased, no question about that. My issue, I think, personally, obviously, what bothers me about all this is the fact that it comes down to where's the money coming from.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like,
Follow
so
the
if
money.
I'm going to get sponsors in order to be able to stay on TV, then I have to get enough people. So what am I going to do? I'm going to, I don't know, jump and rant and rave and make it seem like a telenovela instead of tell you what's actually happening.
And that, there was a little resurgence of that, like in the 80s with Jerry Springer.
Oh, yeah.
People love that, because it just got so dramatic and sensational. And I think that's what you have in a lot of major news channels now, is that kind of just craziness. And hell, you have it in Congress. I mean, there was that
Reality
guy
TV.
who was like picking a fight with the Teamsters guy.
Right.
Take it
a couple days
outside.
ago. Right.
Get your butt out of the chair.
Take it
Yeah.
outside, but like,
You have
we'll do
Bernie
it right
Sanders
here.
being the peacemaker.
Yeah,
That was-
right.
Sit down, you're a U.S. Senator. Yeah.
Oh my God, the world of reality is definitely flipped.
Yeah.
We have just a couple of minutes left before we're going to have to run. I just thought to do a quick little wrap up. Maybe we could kind of just go back around the table. I'm just curious. What do you think the legacy of Gen X is going to wind up being? I mean, we boomers are burdened with our legacy of taking all the good stuff and leaving all the crumbs behind for everybody else. I mean, that seems to be at least one perception. I think a highly inaccurate one, but anyway, I guess I'm biased. But anyway, I guess I just wondered, in years to come, what do you think Gen Z and we're into Gen Alpha? Is that they're the ones who
Is
are
that the next one?
coming after? I'm thinking, gee, we ought to
We
have
lost
like
creativity in naming the generations, right? I mean, like,
Simple.
right, you go from silent generation to, the greatest generation
Yeah,
to the
just challenge
boomers, and
it,
now
yeah.
we're just all
What did they do
others.
back in the 19th century before they came up with all these labels for people?
I think they
'Cause I
just
think
tried to survive.
It was a 20th century invention. Somebody, yeah, right. But anyway, just any final thoughts on kind of what your generation contributed or did or would like to, kind of leave for the next group to deal with?
Well, I mean, the story hasn't finished yet. So, I mean, I would love it to be that, we save constitutional democracy, like keep that alive. Because if we don't do that, game over.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I would love that to be it, and to be, because we do have the resources to sort of save ourselves. And so if we can empower our children to do that, and they can empower their children, if they have children, to do that, I mean, that would be a great legacy. So we've still got time.
It's funny, I don't know how to answer that question at all, because as I'm listening to you speak, I'm like, well, that's interesting, because you're putting us in that middle generation again, that middle child, right? I mean, it's like, pick up the scraps from the boomers and then try
where we
and
are.
teach the next generation to do better,
That's where
right?
we
So, I
are.
mean, that puts us in the, well, nobody pays attention to the Gen X again, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Marsha. I'm picking up on both of you and what you said. I don't quite know how to answer that question either, except to say that it's not accurate to assume at all that anyone who is still alive can't still make a difference, because life is painfully short, and we all have to try to row this boat and right the ship as best we can. So boomers have contributed tremendously to the legacy of music, art, politics, culture, and you did so much that we looked up to. I honestly, my first cousins, some of whom was between my mom and her oldest sibling, there was a 22-year gap. So I've got cousins almost as old as my mom. It's really. So, but I saw a lot from that generation that I still admire in my own family, and the generation before that, of course, what they sacrificed to give everybody a fighting chance, literally, here in this country, is never to be overlooked or forgotten. What can we do right now? I think we just have to kind of keep our fingers on the pulse of the times as they continue to evolve, not wall ourselves off to possibilities, and embrace to the extent that we can, while it may, I speak for myself, a little bit difficult sometimes for me to, re-upload my own software for all the modern things that are going on. Keep trying, because, I think the more humanity that we can bring to our children and bring to all the situations in life, the better off we can at least hope to be, So stick to your corners, stick to our knitting. I'm going to stick to music. And, we have wonderful, wonderful people of this generation doing fantastic work. Two of them are sitting right here. And I'm grateful for a lot of my peers, people I went to high school with. They're doing really, really great things. And they don't give up. They keep trying. We may be small, but we're feisty.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good note to leave the non-buck. But I'm thinking, man, we could talk for another hour about all this stuff.
Sure.
So many interesting aspects to drill down through.
Next time, just have us back. We'll rename the generation. Something creative.
X-Wing.
X-Wingers.
X-Wing.
X-Wingers.
It's already done.
Yeah,
It's already
right,
done.
right, okay. Yeah, well, I'm thinking, we should have you all back for.
Thank you, Andrew.
round two.
Thank you
What
very
you
much.
should
Thank
do
you.
is you
It's
need
fun.
to have a panel where you've got a boomer,
Yeah.
a Gen Xer,
Yeah.
a millennial, and a Gen Z. You
Just
gotta
keep them
have that.
separated, that's all.
Well, I think, no, but that would be a fantastically interesting
Sure.
conversation
It would
to
be.
have.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
something
that's a
that-
great
That'd be the
idea.
perfect, next step for this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Bring it all together.
I like it. Okay, you're hired.
Yeah, you are.
Wait a minute, did I just volunteer? I don't remember volunteering.
Well, anyway, like I said, we could go on for a long time, but we'll have to leave it there for today. But want to thank you all for being with us, for sharing part of your day with us, and hope you found the conversation interesting. I know I sure did. Want to thank again Ari Rudiakov, Paige Vignola, and Matt Samuelson for being with us to give us their insights on Generation X, or X-Wingers, excuse me. Anyway, so we'll be back. Take care. Have a great day.